I literally I was like, what is a sports metaphor here? And I can't do it because I don't care about festivity or sports.
The Horse Race is brought to you by Benchmark Strategies, Boston's leading public affairs and public relations consulting firm. To learn more, connect with Benchmark on LinkedIn at Benchmark Strategies or visit benchmark-strategies.com.
Welcome back to The Horse Race, your weekly look at politics, policy, and elections in Massachusetts. I'm Jennifer Smith, reporter for Commonwealth Beacon, here with Steve Gazella, president of the Massing Polling Group, and it's Thursday, December 11th. Today, we are talking about transportation with Senator Brendan Crighton of Lynn. What kind of crisis are we in? I will ask him. What's to be done about it? I will ask him. Let's see what he says. So, Steve, have they managed to run the Orange Line all the way to Kenya yet?
That's a good question. And no, they haven't. It would actually run in the wrong direction, though I would love to see the financing behind a big dig where the Orange Line had to cross the entire Atlantic Ocean. That would be epic and for the ages. But no, actually, my transportation adventure was we went up to central Kenya, up to the Mount Kenya region, which, as I have learned since I moved here, is actually the second highest peak in Africa after Mount Kilimanjaro.
Look at that. That's incredible. I'm holding all of my fury and envy in my spirit right now because I heard the words baby elephant earlier when we were talking about this, and I just go ahead and hurt me.
Yes, we saw baby elephants. We spent a couple of baby elephants, a whole family of elephants just sort of wandering around this big game reserve where we were driving, and there was nobody else around. It was literally just us and this family of like 10 or 12 elephants just slowly kind of wandering around the area, the baby elephant nursing, the other elephants eating. Just the whole thing was so magical. I honestly don't know how to describe it.
I'm quitting in protest.
You could come visit. That's what you could do, Jen. We could do the horse race, the zebra race, the gazelle race, whatever you want to call it, from Kenya.
Honestly, that sounds so much better than the Red Line perils, though I will say, for the record, because we are an honest, trustworthy institution here, Red Line worked fine today. Red Line was great today. I didn't have to walk through the cold. But last week, I was trying to go to Alewife. There was a cracked rail, and I was told by a very nice but forceful T employee to get on the train going in the opposite direction because allegedly it would then boomerang back and go all the way to Alewife. Not only did we spend the entire trip hearing announcements for stations we were not passing, we get to Ashmont, pause for dramatic effect, and then we are told the train is being taken out of service and shuttles are being brought in.
Completely relatable and also infuriating, like my blood pressure spiking in sympathy.
Yep. It was also very cold.
Yeah. I mean, it actually kind of brings me back to 2015, honestly, which I guess is actually 10 years ago now, somehow, the winter of 2015.
Don't talk about that.
The snow. Yeah, okay. We're just going to settle that aside because we actually have a whole podcast about transportation challenges today. We have Senator Brendan Crighton of Lynn, true transportation expert himself, to join us here in a second. So, Jen, let's dump all of our problems on him and see what he has to say.
Sounds great. I hear everything's going just fine, and I'm sure he will reassure us about that. Every region of our fair state has its own transportation challenges. We're dealing with the political and financial reality of a subway system that's improving but still on the fritz. The commuter rail generally is considered more reliable, but of course it's less frequent. Roads and bridges are in desperate need of repair and modernization. Electric cars seem poised to take a big bite out of the gas tax, which is a funding source for our roads. And regional transit authorities seem to never have enough to do what we all wish they would do. So, here to help us map the way through these challenges, we are joined by State Senator Brendan Crighton, co-chair of the Joint Committee on Transportation. Senator, thank you for being here to talk all things transportation.
Thank you, Jennifer. I appreciate that breakdown. We definitely have a lot on our plate and look forward to the conversation.
So maybe an unintuitive way to start, but I think about this a lot that gets at the core problem here, is we seem to have parallel crises. We've got a housing crisis and we've got kind of a transportation crisis, or at least it feels that way, where people live and work and how they get there and what happens when those things aren't kind of working in a cohesive manner. So maybe I'll start there, which is, do you think we have a transportation crisis? Because everyone seems to agree on the housing side.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely have a housing crisis. On the transportation side, I think we have, crisis is a hard word to define, but I think we have serious challenges ahead of us. But we've been doing a lot of work, I think, to stabilize the system overall across the Commonwealth. So I don't know if there's such thing as a stable crisis, but I feel like we have a ton more work to do, but we're at least keeping our head above water. But obviously, the two are so interconnected. Transportation really touches every sector of the economy and every kind of aspect of our lives here in the Commonwealth. Obviously, it's how you get where you need to go. Certainly, the amount of time wasted sitting in traffic impacts our lives, but also proximity to housing, to workplaces. And certainly, when you think about public health as well as climate change and our goals there, also just so connected to transportation. So there's a lot of different areas that we're working on, but a lot more work to do to stabilize and really modernize this into a 21st century transportation system.
So what does kind of a stabilized crisis, if we're thinking about that over the past few years, kind of feel like to you? I'm thinking, Boston congestion feels like a crisis to basically everybody stuck in it. Steve deals with the orange line until it's seen a lot of improvements. The red line for me is really kind of hit or miss. So what's your kind of personal transportation process journey, your normal commute, and what do you see kind of not working?
So I have two young kids that require a lot of pickups and drop-offs from sports and activities in school. So I don't take the T nearly as much as I'd like to or as I used to. We also, just moved to a different part of Lynn, but we were, a short 5-minute walk from the commuter rail station, which made it very convenient to hop on. I'm embarrassed to say I drive probably 90% of the time. But I think, my experience, certainly is the chair of transportation has been kind of a roller coaster. When we came in, we had what was then a real, acute crisis with, tragic deaths and injuries at stations. We had train cars on fire. We had, safety disasters all over the place. The FTA, came in kind of an unprecedented way and almost, took over really and laid out a number of directives. The Transportation Committee typically deals, on legislation and funding and obviously like exploring policy, but, we kind of jumped into more of an oversight role and, had a series of hearings, yada, yada, yada. Fast forward and where we are today, we have, eliminated slow zones, though there are more disruptions even this week in commuting. But we have an administration in the Haley administration and a general manager / secretary now in Phil Eng that I think came with the approach that we're going to communicate directly with our constituents, our riders, our legislators, all stakeholders, highlight what the problems are, what the issues are, talk candidly about, this is going to cause pain. It's going to disrupt your service. But at the end of this, we're going to see, better, more stabilized service, things that the deferred maintenance that had occurred over decades and decades. So I think he's done a lot, and the administration's done a lot, and the legislature as well, to build back that trust, the trust that, and build back that ridership. Obviously, we lost a ton of ridership after the pandemic, and then the trust lost with these safety incidents and just an unreliable system. And I feel like now, people are rooting for the T again and rooting for, progress. And I think there's an understanding that we're going to have to roll up our sleeves. It's a very old system. We have to make up for the sins of the past in many ways. So I'm feeling like we have momentum at this point, but never-ending list of things to do to make it better.
Right. Well, I think one of the reasons, of course, that the housing and transportation questions seem so tied together and have been so at the top of so many people's minds over the past year or so is that one of the biggest flashpoints touching both of those has been the MBTA communities housing law, which basically says that communities within sort of a service area or adjacent to the service area of the MBTA have to zone for more multifamily housing in a certain distance within that transit. And the reason that I bring that up is, it's the ship that launched 1,000 podcast episodes. We've talked about this on the podcast. The question is basically, did the state mean this to be mandatory for all of these cities and towns. Plenty of communities still have agita over this and are still fighting it in court. So the reason that I bring this up is, is there a similarly kind of daring play for transportation specifically? Like, what is kind of the blockbuster move, essentially, to try and deal with the transportation side of that question?
That's a great question. I think, the success of the fair share amendment has probably had a lot of folks kind of, taking a step back from pursuing something very bold, something as bold as the MBTA Communities Act, just recognizing that we're seeing, above, our expectations in terms of revenue, and we're trying to put that to good use, which I think, this past year really did, working with the Transportation Funding Task Force and the administration to really shore up the T's finances for the next couple of years, invest in our RTAs, low-income fares, water transportation, you name it, across the board. I think we did a lot. And we also did a lot to opening up additional bonding capacity by putting the fair share revenue directly into the Commonwealth Transportation Fund. We were able to open up an additional $4 billion of bonding capacity. So that will help us on the capital side as well. So I think, I don't want to say the fair share was bold. Obviously, it was something that it was bold, but it was, decided at the ballot box. I think, as part of the task force, of the Transportation, Funding Task Force, we looked at stabilizing the system first and then enhancing and then transforming. I think we need to turn the page now towards the enhancing piece of it / transforming it. There's not particular timelines, I don't believe, attached to either. But fair share was great. It stabilized everything, and it's making investments, it's making a difference both in education and transportation. It was never meant to be a silver bullet for transportation. $24 billion state of good repair with the T. I don't even know that we fully grasp how much on the MassDOT side our state of good repair is. And you look in the near future at the T, we're going to be at a fiscal cliff again. And I think that's largely attributed to what was in good faith in 2000, around 2000, I believe, forward funding transportation and tying it to the sales tax. But at the time, they expected the sales tax to be growing between 6 and 8%. In reality, it only grew 2%. So all these projections of how much money the revenue the T was going to receive just never lived up. So I'm certainly all for every reform we can get, and everyone says reform before revenue, but I think we've shortchanged the system for so long, as well as our RTAs. We have to keep regional equity in mind as well. But when it comes to public transit, Massachusetts is Massachusetts, Boston isn't Boston. Without this system, we have no alternative. We need to really roll up our sleeves and figure out, again, to your, when you said at the opening, the gas tax, eroding over time by design, right? So how do we modernize our transportation system, transportation funding system in a way that is both equitable, but also, affordable as we continue to struggle with this, and also meeting the needs of what the system is, requires. What can our riders expect in improved service or expanded service or reliability? What can they expect in terms of their own communities with our roads and bridges, our RTAs, water transportation? I think we need to clearly communicate that, and I'm, excited to start to have that conversation.
And to put a point on this too, and I'm glad you brought up the Fair Share Amendment, which of course, as you noted, was passed by ballot measure. And so there's something in a year where we might be heading toward 2026, a record 12 ballot measures. I'm a California native. Last cycle, they had 11. We might beat California in terms of ballot measures. And the reason that I bring this up, and I don't mean to kind of sound snide about this, but if the most dramatic change around transportation funding was something kind of that the voters had to do or kind of had to push through. The Transportation Task Force, took a look at what we do about this looming fiscal cliff, this big hole, and kind of said, use the fair share money for this. So to kind of, put a little bit of a point on it, is the legislature or is there a wish list of something kind of at that level here? Or is it kind of use what the voters did as well as we can? Like, is the legislature in the mood for a big move?
I'm not quite sure, to be honest with you. It's obviously very challenging and uncertain times, right? So it's, we have so many other issues we face that we're really trying to focus on just to stay above water on this. And it's largely because of actions at the federal level. Like, we're in a very stable position here financially in Massachusetts, the highest rainy day fund ever, at $8 billion, great bond rating, making investments. And I think we were in a good spot, but unfortunately we're being punished for a lot of the initiatives that we believe should be priorities. And because of our emphasis on those, whether it's climate or healthcare or equity, all these things, now we're being punished. So I don't know that at this moment there's the will to pass some, modernization of our transportation, finance system. It inevitably needs to happen. I don't think anyone says it doesn't. So it's working with our colleagues, working with our constituents, our stakeholders, all areas of the economy to see what would be the best mix of options. I think the gas tax is historically what we've looked to, and it's no longer something we can kind of lean back on. But there's a reason why it's taken, a decade, most of my life to really kind of bump up our transportation system. We're going back to, the last significant gas increase in the early 90s, right? So I think we need to look at the options. Technology's changed. We have a lot more examples across the country and across the world to look at in terms of ways we can do this efficiently. So I'm ready to roll up my sleeves and have the conversation. Obviously, you get criticized for talking about revenues at any point. There's no immediate vote coming up. There's a few bills out there, but there's nothing at this moment that's taking our eye off the prize of improving competitiveness and affordability here in the Commonwealth. But if we don't have the conversation, we're never going to get to a consensus on what the best approach is.
And you mentioned, of course, that it can feel kind of, to voters, of course, like Massachusetts is kind of floating out on its own here. Funding of all sorts for blue states is being hacked away. Joe Biden, notably loves a train, is no longer the president. So what are you watching from the feds? Is there any level of hope there? And then the adjacent question to that is, how is the legislature trying to deal with that change when it comes to transportation? Because it's a broad issue, but specifically around transportation.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think it's been a bit of a roller coaster. If you, judge the impact by tweets, it's in that type of messaging from the administration. Sometimes it seems catastrophic, but I think when you kind of dive down into the folks that are doing the work at the federal level, like they're, the vast majority of them are trying to do the right thing and continue the mission, right? Like, these are folks that have worked in government for a long time at the ground level. And, they're trying to get money out. If we're thinking about transportation, trying to get money out on the ground and get projects moving. And I think this administration has found a good balance in, pushing back when we need to, but also, working closely with, and, in our case in transportation, the FTA, and, trying to make sure that grants, well, certainly the safety directives, and we've worked with them to, resolve all of those issues that were pending, and they weren't without challenges and without costs. Like, it wasn't like we just checked some boxes and the FTA said, okay, we're all set. That was a ton of work, building up the workforce again, dealing with all the slow zones and fixing all those tracks, signaling. So much work's been put into it, and I think we've shown that we are, a good partner to the feds, and I hope that that's reciprocated at the lower levels. Certainly politicians are going to say what politicians are going to say, and I think as long as we're continuing to make progress at the ground level, and certainly Phil's done a great job. Sorry, Secretary Yang has done a great job communicating with our federal partners. We can't have a 21st century transportation system in the Commonwealth without a federal partner. It's just we would never have the funding for that. And again, we fall back on rail a lot, but these are our roads, these are our bridges. Certainly, the I-90 Alliston project, the Cape Cod bridges. We were very pumped to see the Draw 1 bridge at North Station done. That's a huge project that impacts, commuter rail across many lines. So we're making progress, but the uncertainty is very painful to deal with.
Right. And we're going to end with, put away your Red Sox hat, put on your Yankees or Mets cap here. New York has been, you know what? I don't presume you have any. That would be unsafe for people. But in New York, of course, they have been rolling with congestion pricing. Lawmakers have passed a pilot around that here in Massachusetts twice. Why not congestion pricing, kind of just like full speed ahead here in Massachusetts? Like, the numbers are pretty much in Manhattan. Buses are moving up to 20% faster. There's a 22% decline in particulates. What are we kind of still mulling, and what is fine to go ahead with? Like, where is your head at on congestion pricing right now?
No, thank you. I'm glad you brought it up. So, I mean, I rarely make the news statewide, and after a forum a couple weeks ago, when I just said the words congestion pricing and said that it should be on the table, kind of blew up a bit. But I stand by those statements. Like, congestion pricing, I think too often is looked at like Beetlejuice. Like, you say it 3 times and all of a sudden congestion pricing is here on our roads in Massachusetts. It's fine to talk about policies and areas where we disagree. And I think it would be foolish for us, if we're talking about modernizing in the intermediate and long term our transportation financing system, to leave what is a very rewarding policy that we've seen results across the world, and certainly monitoring on what's going on in New York. So why would you take that arbitrarily off the table? So I want to have the conversation. I want to continue to see the benefits and perhaps unintended consequences in different parts of the world. But everything should be on the table, probably except gas tax, which I think has run its course. But let's look at the technology. Let's look at what other folks are doing, whether it's, having a more equitable tolling system. We pay in my district on the North Shore, whether you're taking the bridge or the tunnel, you're paying every time. The Metro West certainly, is the Senate President brings up quite often. If we're willing to pay tolls, shouldn't everybody? And looking at different fee-based structures that really measure, I think, how many roads you're traveling. I think also, if traffic is one of the biggest pain points in the Commonwealth, that's part of the benefit. The other benefit is a huge investment in public transportation, which we hear from people they want as well. They want better systems. So I think it's foolish to not talk about and to not seriously consider and weigh the pros and the cons. Like the pilot you mentioned, like why are we scared to do a pilot? Like, you don't do those things recklessly. They cost money and time and resources, but it's pretty clear that this has worked in other places. And I think, again, falling back on that emphasis on equity, affordability, and what the overall benefit is going to be for the system at large. And we need to keep building the trust back with our constituents and ridership. But I'm happy you brought it up. I am not afraid to say congestion pricing, and I think other folks should come to the table with their thoughts on it as well.
Yeah, not to be cheeky, but the thing that comes to mind here is basically, where do you think you sit compared to the rest of the lawmakers when it comes to those sorts of swings here? Because it's the common acknowledgement at this point, like the two chambers aren't necessarily running on kind of the same beat, like maybe parallel tracks or perpendicular tracks, whatever terrain metaphor you want to use. Like, does there seem to be an appetite for this kind of thing, or do you think you're kind of running up against a wall here?
I think for a good portion of the legislature, there's an interest in this space. I don't think it's every member has their own committees they serve on and their subject matter that they're focused on. So I don't know that everyone's dove into it completely, but I don't know that I don't think it's a chamber versus chamber issue as much as being thoughtful of the differences all of our districts have, and geographically how different it is. I complain all the time about not having the blue line to Lynn, or we have an electrification to Lynn yet. We don't have this frequent service. And then you go out to Western Mass and in the Berkshires, my colleagues have been very generous with their time out there, and they're in transportation deserts, even with the best functioning RTAs, and they're trying their best. Like, if you don't have a car, you can't get anywhere. There's not even Ubers in many cases, or taxis. So I think every member is coming to this in good faith. I think we need to hear them out and make sure that whatever system we come up with is benefiting their part of their district, and take into consideration how different different parts of the Commonwealth are. I mean, then you also have, I mean, with, I don't want to bring up other controversial subjects, but, we think about the borders, right? Like the tolls on different borders. And for those border communities, like that's, very, very painful for them. So it's a challenge. I think that's why it's taken so long. But I'm excited to try to build on the conversation and hopefully build a consensus around something that makes a real difference.
All right, Senator Crighton, as always, thank you so much for being here. It was a delight.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jennifer. Appreciate it.
And that brings us to our next segment, which we are calling our political calculus section. So starting this week and going forward, when we have a guest, we're going to take some time, piece through what they actually said, what got left out, any polling or other reporting that might bump up against it, that sort of thing. So, Steve, do you have your analysis hat on?
I have taken it out of the closet and put it on. I'm ready to sort. Let's sort.
I bet it's beautiful. I bet it's a beautiful hat. So one thing that was occurring to me as I was talking with the senator is it really genuinely seems like every single subject about transportation in Massachusetts is a third rail. Pardon the pun. I'm really sorry about it. But seriously, Steve, is there any subject about transit in Massachusetts that everybody agrees on?
I think that maybe they're very lightly charged third rails. Like if you put your hand on it, you might feel a slight buzz. But these are not third rails. They're where if you touch it, you're going to instantly die politically or anything like that. Like that just is not a thing. The polls tell us a little bit about it. But then the other thing I think is just that Democrats have vast, overwhelming majorities in both houses and win every election that could possibly be fathomed. So, if they wanted to trade in some of that political capital to do stuff that was either very hard or at least moderately hard, they could actually do so. Or they could say, we couldn't possibly do that because it's too hard, or the voters would kill us. And, I just don't buy that that's intuitively, I don't buy it. And from the polling, I also don't buy it. But we can, look at those numbers in a sec. What was your reaction to it?
Well, I think that it was interesting and kind of telling that Senator Crighton kind of referred to congestion pricing specifically as basically saying Beetlejuice multiple times, that people have this sort of kind of panic response to it. And I am thinking about this because referring to this polling in New York, when they were first looking at congestion pricing, it was really unpopular initially. The New York Times had some really good analysis of that, where it's basically like, once this started happening, people started relaxing a little bit more, but there wasn't this level of eagerness to start with. And so I am kind of fascinated by the idea that evoking a potentially complicated or messy topic can be enough sometimes to stop the conversation from ever happening in the first place.
Yeah, I think that that's true. And it is also true that voters don't have some secret thing where if you just poll just right, they have the answer for you, particularly on revenue. The things that are always the most popular are tax rich people, tax big corporations, whatever you do, don't tax me. However, on transportation, when you kind of frame it as the gas tax is diminishing, we're just not getting what we used to out of it, like what should replace the gas tax? Then you do get at least decent numbers, people at least open to the idea that we might need to think differently about it rather than just you either pay the gas tax at the pump or you buy an EV and you avoid it, or you drive less and take the bus and avoid it. They are, I think, voters are fairly open to that conversation.
Yeah, it seems like what we're basically talking about is you can poll to sort of assess what the basic familiarity is, the basic feelings are, and then politics kick in. Then you got to go and make a pitch and see how that goes, right?
Yeah, that's also true. And, we've certainly seen in recent years that political leaders can change public opinion through leadership, through messaging, through, persuasion and so forth. It doesn't just have to be you wait for voters to get there and then you run to the head of the pack so that you can be the leader. You can actually lead voters to somewhere that they're not already. But even if you didn't want to do that, you can look at the idea of a study on congestion pricing, which is all that the state legislature has passed before, and see there you have 48% saying yes, they should study this idea, 35% saying no, that they should not study this idea. So I think that even if you do want something where there's net support, congestion pricing, the study, the pilot, et cetera, already has that.
And one of the other ideas that Senator Crighton kind of alluded to, and maybe is more interesting because the governor specifically has kind of nixed the idea, is former Transportation Secretary Monica Tibbetts-Nutt at one point made mention of the possibility of tolls basically as you cross the border in or out of Massachusetts. And that basically did cause this big firestorm. Governor Healy stepped in and was like, we are not doing that. But Crighton said, we probably should be having a conversation about these. I was so struck specifically by, and I'm glad you brought up the gas tax, Steve, that he was saying, everything should be on the table except the gas tax, which he sort of thinks is done, that it's reaching kind of its natural limit because of policy orienting us away from relying on it, notably shifting away from gas consuming vehicles here. So I guess I'm really interested in your take on this idea of what does it mean to have everything on the table? You've done polling asking people, what is everything you'd like to see on the table? Has that been flexible? Has that been something they could move on? Did they have the same response that the governor has?
The thing that stands out, I think, is that voters are at least open to various ways of replacing the gas tax. So I wouldn't say they're excited, but you see a lot of somewhat support. You see a little bit more than half somewhat or strongly supporting ideas for things like more tolls, et cetera. You see that for congestion pricing. You see it for vehicle miles traveled tax. That's one we haven't actually really talked about, but is another idea that's been kind of tossed around for replacing the gas tax, is just basically taxing people on how many miles they drive, regardless of what kind of car they drive and so forth. So there's a lot of different ideas that people are at least open to the idea of. And I think it comes significantly from the idea that voters get the fact that we're more on our own than we've been in the past. So by about a 3-to-1 margin, voters think that we are more likely to have to rely on our own revenue ideas rather than being able to count on federal funding under the Trump administration. They've seen what's happened in Massachusetts on funding on all sorts of different things, public, private, health research, transportation, you name it, et cetera. So I think that's one of the dynamics that pushes voters to perhaps be a little bit more open than perhaps they otherwise would be. We do have to leave it there on transportation, but we will be right back with our holiday-appropriate trivia answer.
I'm Zainab Asma-Doyle, Research Director at the Massing Polling Group. The Massing Polling Group serves the region's leading foundations, political groups, government entities, and businesses. Our surveys and focus groups bring high-quality data to the toughest questions facing society today. Learn more at massingpolling.com.
Jen, holiday trivia, what do we have?
Well, you asked me, and then I asked the public, why did the Massachusetts Bay Colony at one point ban Christmas celebrations? I said they just hate joy. It wasn't completely off. In 1659, apparently, the Massachusetts Bay Colony enacted a law called Penalty for Keeping Christmas. The notion was that, quote, such festivals were superstitiously kept in other countries, were a great dishonor of God and offense of others, and there were consequences if you were too Christmassy. Anyone found celebrating Christmas by failing to work, quote, feasting or in any other way, so there go all our sides, shall pay for every offense 5 shillings. That would be about $48 today. So put away your wreaths or I'm coming around and I'm demanding 5 shillings from you. I am Jennifer Smith, signing off with Steve Koczela. Our production and theme music today is done by Charlie Koczela. You can write to us at thehorse-race-podcast@gmail.com. Don't forget to give The Horse Race a review wherever you're hearing us now. Subscribe to Commonwealth Beacon's daily download, and reach out to the Massing Polling Group if you need any polls or focus groups done. Thank you all for listening. See you next week.